You know, it's funny. MMA. You think you know how a fight's going to go, who's tough, who's skilled.
And then bam, something completely unexpected happens.
Exactly. Upsets, guys with surprising backgrounds, whole promotions vanishing. It's wild.
Total chaos sometimes.
And that's exactly what we're digging into today. We got a listener request, actually.
Yeah, someone asking us to look beyond the usual highlight reels, you know?
Right, get into the weird stuff, the unexpected stories from, like, the early days and as the sport was evolving.
The nuances, the surprises,
Yeah.
the stuff that makes you go, huh, really?
And we found some absolute gold digging through our sources. We've got historical stuff, fighter interviews, behind-the-scenes bits.
It's a real mixed bag, kind of like early MMA itself, wasn't it?
Totally. So our mission today, basically, is to unpack some of these unexpected stories.
Yeah, shine a light on the fighters, the business moves, the personalities that maybe shape things more than you'd think.
Get past that surface level, find those aha moments.
Exactly. Should we jump into the first one?
Let's do it. Okay, this idea of the tough guy image. And you got to talk about Tank Abbott.
Oh, yeah, Tank.
Seg, the early UFC guys, they marketed him, and let's be fair, he marketed himself too as this, like, ultimate street brawler.
Menacing, right? Pitbull look, the whole thing. The guy you don't want to meet.
But the funny thing is the image. It wasn't the whole story, was it?
Not at all. And this is where it gets interesting. He was actually a college graduate.
Right, and a junior college wrestling champion.
Yeah, which, doesn't quite fit the just rolled out of a bar fight narrative the UFC was pushing back then.
No way. They loved the Street Fighter angle.
Yep.
It sold tickets, played into that whole no rules vibe.
Definitely. But the reality in the cage, when he faced guys with real martial arts training.
Yeah, the results often didn't match the hype. He beat some guys, sure, but against
Okay.
the legitimate martial artists.
He usually came up short. It kind of highlights that early tension, the raw image versus actual honed skill.
And the irony, the guy supposedly hated traditional martial arts but kept losing to them.
And then there are those stories. Fights over, opponents heading to the hospital.
And Tank's head into the bar.
Yeah. Win or lose, apparently. Talk about keeping up appearances.
It definitely solidified the persona, didn't it? Even if the wins weren't always there against the top guys.
Perception versus reality. Big theme in early MMA.
Okay, sticking with promotions.
Yeah.
Let's talk Affliction Entertainment. Now, this seemed like a can't-miss idea.
Oh, man. On paper, it looked amazing. Huge clothing brand, super popular with the MMA crowd.
Backed by Donald Trump, partnered with Golden Boy Boxing.
And they had Fedor, the #1 heavyweight in the world, arguably.
What could possibly go wrong?
Right. The premise was just irresistible. Leverage the brand, showcase Fedor.
And they put on 2 killer shows. Stacked cards, really entertaining fights.
They really did. The lineups were incredible for the time.
But then, just before that third big show in 2009, poof.
Gone. Vanished. Just like that.
So what happened there? It seemed like they had everything going for them.
Well, it kind of comes down to sustainability, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They had Fedor, who is a draw.
The main draw.
Exactly. But beyond him, they didn't really have other proven, consistent pay-per-view draws, what we call needle movers.
And they were paying guys huge money, right?
Yeah.
Like Tim Sylvia, Arnett, Arlovsky, Belfort.
Massive salaries,
Mhm.
all big names, former champs, legends, but maybe not guys who could carry a PPV on their own at that point.
So high costs, relying too much on one guy.
Yeah, it just wasn't a sustainable model. It's a tough lesson, you can have exciting shows, but the business side has to work too.
A noble failure, as our source put it.
Oh, it's
A failure nonetheless.
sad but true.
Okay, from noble failures to surprising financial moves, Akabono, sumo legend.
Yokozuna, the god in Japan, basically.
You'd think these top sumo guys are just set for life, rolling in cash,
That's the perception, for sure. And they were paid well, like up to $500,000 a year back then.
which is good money.
It is, but maybe not rich, especially with, the lifestyle and expenses that come with being a Yokozuna in Japan.
And apparently Akabono had some expensive tastes.
Yeah.
And a restaurant that didn't work out.
Yeah, the sources mentioned that retirement maybe wasn't looking quite as comfortable as you'd expect.
So what does he do? He ditches centuries of sumo tradition.
Which is a huge deal culturally.
Huge. And joins the loud and flashy K1 kickboxing show.
It was pretty shocking at the time. But then you hear the numbers.
Over $1 million per fight in K1.
Right. Suddenly the tradition maybe doesn't look quite so appealing compared to that kind of payday.
It really puts it in perspective. Even at the absolute top of a revered traditional sport, money talks.
It shows the growing power and financial pull of these newer combat sports formats, even against deeply established ones.
Okay, let's pivot back to the cage dynamics. Thiago Alves and his takedown defense.
Oh yeah, Alves was a monster at keeping fights on the feet. His sprawl was legendary.
He out-wrestled Josh Koscheck, a former NCAA Division I champ, and then knocked him out with leg kicks.
That was a massive win. Beating Koscheck at his own game like that, it put him right in the title picture.
Absolutely. It earned him the shot against Georges St. Pierre, GSP.
Who was just hitting his stride as this unstoppable welterweight force.
So you'd think, okay, Alves has the answer to GSP's wrestling, right?
Yeah.
He proved it against Koscheck.
You'd think. But this is where levels really showed. GSP's takedowns were just different.
Relentless, unstoppable, like the source said.
Alf spent most of that fight on his back, unfortunately for him.
His great takedown defense just wasn't enough against that level of wrestling and strategy.
It's a perfect example, really. You can be amazing in one area, but against the truly elite, well-rounded guys,
Yeah,
you need more.
definitely. Now, submission specialist. Let's talk Shinya Aoki.
Aoki, Mr. Flying Submissions, incredible grappler.
Pulled off a Goga Plata in Pride against Joachim and Hansen. That's rare air.
Super rare. It showed his creativity, his willingness to try anything. He really cemented his reputation with wins like that.
Became a big enough name to headline that Yaranoka event against an Olympic medalist.
Yep. Then he signed with Dream,
Well,
and things got a little complicated.
the Jay-Z Cavalcante fight. The illegal elbows,
Right. Aoki chose not to continue after getting hit with illegal elbows to the back of the neck.
which were illegal, no doubt.
Yeah.
But the way it happened, some people questioned it.
Right. Yeah, some observers felt the elbows weren't that bad, and maybe he could have continued. It raised some questions about his grit, fair or not.
But then he came back at the rematch.
And dominated Jay-Z, submitted him, so he definitely answered some of those critics.
Showed his skills were legit, controversy aside.
For sure. His grappling was never really in doubt.
Okay, next up, Andrei Arlovsky. The what-ifs surrounding him.
Oh, absolutely. Arlovsky's career is full of those moments. He had, like, 2 distinct periods where he looked like the guy.
First time was around 2005, right? After TUF blew up, Frank Mir had his motorcycle accident.
Arlovsky wins the interim title. He had it all, the look, the charisma, fast hands, the surprising leg locks.
He seemed poised to be the face of the heavyweight division.
Totally. Then he gets promoted to undisputed champ, gets the rematch with Tim Sylvia.
And he dropped Sylvia early. Yeah, looked like it was over.
Yeah, went in for the kill, and Sylvia catches him. TKO loss.
Oof, brutal turnaround.
And the immediate rematch after that was just dull. A decision loss.
He won 3 straight after that, didn't he? Against good guys.
He did, but somehow that second title shot just never came back around in that UFC run.
So close yet so far. And then there was the Affliction run later.
Right, the second potential peak.
Yeah.
Signed with Affliction, the big fight against Fedor looming, another huge chance that didn't quite pan out the way he hoped.
Just shows how timing, luck, one punch,
Yeah,
it can all change a career path.
definitely. So many variables in this sport.
Speaking of variables, Josh Barnett, his journey east and back, and, well, the drug test issues.
Barnett's career is complex. That's a good word for it. A lot of people might not remember, but he actually failed a test way back in 2001.
Before they even really had a serious testing program, right?
Exactly. Our source kind of hints that maybe it suggests a pattern, looking back.
Then he heads off to Japan. He really wanted to do pro wrestling, didn't he?
Yeah, that was a big passion for him. He wrestled for New Japan, fought in Pancrase, that early Japanese shoot-style league, and obviously had a big run in Pride.
He really embraced that whole Japanese scene.
Yeah.
Fought the best guys over there.
Built a really significant career in Japan, balancing the wrestling and the MMA.
And then, Affliction. Again, that positive steroid test right before the Fedor fight.
Huge fallout from that. Cost him the biggest fight of his career, arguably.
And it didn't just hurt him, right? It was a major factor in Affliction collapsing.
Yeah, it pretty much sunk the whole promotion. It was a massive blow and really brought the PED issue in MMA to the forefront again.
Man, what a domino effect. Okay, let's switch gears. Phil Baroni, finding new life in Pride.
The New York badass. Always entertaining.
His Pride debut against Ikuhisa Manoa, the Punk.
Mm-hmm.
Memorable for Baroni's pre-fight comments alone.
Oh, yeah, the quotes about the mullet, the Speedo. Baroni never minced words.
But the fight itself was surprising, wasn't it? Manoa's a grappler, right? Pro wrestling ambitions.
Exactly. You'd expect him to try and take Baroni down, but instead...
They just stood there and slugged it out. An absolute brawl.
Totally unexpected. Manoa just decided to throw down, seemed like he wanted to put on a show for the Pride fans.
Both guys were absolutely gassed after the first round. Looked like they could barely stand.
Total exhaustion. But Baroni managed to finish it in the second with soccer kicks and stomps.
Legal in Pride. Wild rules.
It was a huge win for Baroni. Really got his momentum back, and the Japanese fans loved that kind of heart.
And sticking with Baroni,
Yeah.
he had some choice words for Frank Shamrock.
Yeah, not a fan, apparently. Baroni basically said Shamrock criticized fighters from the commentary booth but wouldn't step up himself.
Called him an armchair quarterback, essentially.
Pretty much. Just highlights some of those underlying rivalries and personalities clashing, even off camera.
A little bit of spice there.
Eh.
Okay, let's rewind way back. Early Vitor Belfort, the Phenom.
Burst onto the scene with that insane hand speed. Looked unbeatable, like this bubble of infallibility, as one source put it.
He was lined up for a title shot against Maurice Smith at UFC Japan. Seemed like a coronation.
Everyone thought so. Belfort was the future.
And then, Randy Couture happened.
The natural. Couture was supposed to be just, a tough veteran for Vitor to beat.
Instead, Couture completely shocked the world. Outboxed him, outworked him.
And exposed his ground game. Even though Vitor was a BJJ black belt, Couture just dominated him on the mat. TKO finish.
Huge upset. Just popped that bubble immediately. Showed that technique and strategy could beat raw talent.
Belfort bounced back, though. That knockout of Wanderlei Silva right after.
Oh man, that was unbelievably fast. Like lightning.
Showed he still had that explosive power. But then, he was gone from the UFC for almost 4 years.
Right, went off to Japan like a lot of guys did back then. Seeking bigger paydays, different competition.
Part of that whole generation exploring the global MMA scene.
Okay, another early, maybe less famous story. Jerry Bollander from the Lion's Den.
Frank Shamrock's camp.
Yeah.
Known for being super tough.
And Bollander had to fight his own friend just to get a shot in the UFC.
Yeah, apparently nothing was given to you at the Lion's Den. You had to earn it, even against teammates.
And Bollander, the smaller guy, tapped his friend with a heel hook.
Shows the skill level. Then he gets into UFC 8, faces Scott Ferozzo, who is like 350 pounds.
Massive guy. And Bollander submits him with the guillotines.
Incredible upset. David versus Goliath stuff. He lost his next fight, but beating Ferozzo proved he belonged there.
Just shows the wild matchups and unpredictability of the early UFC days. Different sizes, styles. Anything could happen.
Absolutely. Technique could overcome sheer size.
We've also got a quick mention here of Paul Buentello.
The headhunter.
That powerful right hand. Even when he was fighting on, smaller shows outside the UFC, that threat was always there. People talked about him coming back.
Yeah, that knockout power keeps you relevant, always one punch away.
Now for some fun trivia. The Buffers.
Ah, yes. The voice of the Octagon.
Most fans know Bruce Buffer, the third is Teely May, but he wasn't the first.
Yep. His stepbrother, Michael Buffer, Let's Get Ready to Rumble, actually did some of the early UFCs.
But his main gig was WCW wrestling, right? And they saw UFC as competition.
Yeah, apparently WCW wasn't thrilled about him working for the competition, so Michael had to step aside.
And in steps Bruce. Became an absolute icon. His energy is synonymous with the UFC intro.
Totally carved out his own legendary status.
Shifting back to fighters. Emerging Japanese talent. Cage Force events.
Yeah, promotions like Cage Force in Japan were really important for developing talent. Like a pipeline.
Mentioning guys like Kazuma Saki, Yoshiyuki Yoshida, potential future UFC fighters coming out of there.
Japan's always been a hotbed for MMA, and these smaller promotions were crucial for giving guys experience before hitting the world stage.
And over in the UK, there was Cage Rage. Started super small, right? Just trying to buy some gym mats.
Incredible story. Started as basically a fundraiser, and somehow blew up into the biggest MMA promotion in the UK.
Showcased local UK guys, but also brought in some big international names. Anderson Silva fought there. Vitor Belfort.
Yeah, they mixed it up. And they also had Butterbean and Herb Dean refereeing.
Huh. That's amazing. Butterbean and Herb Dean on the same show. Perfectly captures that early, sometimes weird mix in MMA.
Eclectic is a good word for it.
Pete Williams. Another guy with an all-time highlight reel moment.
The spinning back fist knockout of Matt Serra. Still see that one all the time.
Incredible KO. But his overall UFC record was only 3-2. Shows highlights aren't everything.
Exactly. Consistency is key. Williams had that dynamic style, judo throws, karate, produced flashes of brilliance.
And he was on TU4, the comeback season for veterans.
Right. That season wasn't maybe the best overall, but Williams stood out.
The sequin hat. offering to bling it for the other fighters. Pure gold.
Yeah, he had personality. Definitely memorable, even outside the cage performance.
Okay, let's talk about a monster fight. Lesnar versus Carwin, UFC 116.
Oh man, the build-up for that was huge. Two absolute behemoths.
And Lesnar was coming back from that serious illness, diverticulitis.
Right, a lot of questions about how he'd look. Carwin was undefeated, just destroying people.
And Carwin came out and nearly did it again. He was all over Lesnar in the first round. Looked like it was over.
Brutal onslaught. Lesnar was hurt bad, taking huge shots against the fence. I thought it was stopped.
Me too. But somehow Lesnar survived, and
Yeah.
Carwin just gassed out completely.
Yeah, he threw everything into that first round. Punched himself out.
Second round starts. Carwin looks exhausted. Lesnar takes him down.
Arm triangle. Done. Incredible comeback by Lesnar. Showed amazing toughness.
And maybe showed the limits of Carwin being a part-time fighter, right? He talked about feeling like he was in a full body cramp.
Yeah, that quote really tells you how much he emptied the tank. Amazing fight, though.
Definitely. Okay, let's touch on some rougher edges of early MMA rules, or maybe lack thereof.
Yeah, the no rules label wasn't entirely true, but some things were allowed early on that are unthinkable now, like groin strikes.
Seriously, they allowed groin strikes.
What? Apparently pressure from some traditional martial artists who felt it was part of, real fighting.
Wow. And Keith Hackney definitely used them against Joe Son at UFC 4. That clip is infamous.
Brutal, uncomfortable to watch. Our source even makes a dark comment about it being fitting punishment given Son's later legal troubles.
Yeah, that adds a grim layer. Then you had guys known as rule breakers, like Gerard Gordeau from Holland.
And Dirty Bob Schreiber, apparently a nice guy outside the ring, but infamous for antics inside.
And Gilbert Yvel, taking it to another level by punching and kicking a referee.
Yeah, Yvel had some absolutely wild moments, clearly crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed, shows how chaotic things could be.
It definitely needed stricter rules and enforcement back then.
For sure.
Okay, back to Randy Couture, facing the Giants.
Randy, Captain America, amazing wrestler, incredible strategist, but often undersized at heavyweight.
He beat a lot of bigger guys, but against the really big ones like Barnett and Rico Rodriguez.
Yeah, that's where the size difference really mattered. Couture could hang with him, but if they got on top.
It was trouble. He ended up losing his title to both of them, didn't he?
Yep. Showed that even for a master technician like Couture, sheer size could be the deciding factor at heavyweight sometimes.
Dominic Cruz. Let's talk about his footwork philosophy.
Unique is an understatement. Cruz was all about not getting hit. Said his footwork was ridiculous, inspired by Muhammad Ali.
Moving backwards, feinting constantly, weird angles. It drove opponents crazy.
And he was so accurate with those quick punches coming in after making guys miss. Master of distance and timing.
A completely different approach to striking.
Yeah.
Proved defense could be a primary weapon.
Absolutely. Very innovative.
Marcus Davis, the Irish hand grenader.
Yeah.
Irish scrapper.
Yeah, really embraced that persona. And he was huge in breaking MMA into Europe. Fought 7 times straight over there.
Always put on a show, right?
Sure.
Maybe not the most technical guy, but always exciting.
Totally. And he apparently made more money from fight of night bonuses than his actual contracts.
Wow. That shows you what Zuffa valued, especially in new markets. Excitement.
Definitely. It highlights that tension, though. Pure sport versus entertainment spectacle. Can be a slippery slope.
Nick Diaz. Where do you even start?
Huh. Certifiable, as one source puts it. And honestly,
Yeah.
fighting Joe Riggs in the hospital after their fight, throwing a shoe at Diego Sanchez, taunting KJ Noon's dad.
The list goes on, and fighting Takanori Gomi while admittedly high on
It
marijuana.
was completely unpredictable. You never knew what Nick Diaz was going to do or say.
But incredibly compelling to watch, both inside and outside the cage.
Yeah.
Love him or hate him, you watched.
True. Okay, another huge upset. Frankie Edgar beating BJ Penn at UFC 112.
Massive. Edgar was like a plus 600 underdog. Nobody gave him a chance.
Penn was a lightweight king, looked untouchable. Edgar was seen as too small, no knockout power, couldn't possibly submit BJ.
Yeah, the matchup looked terrible for Edgar on paper.
But he just went out there and outworked him, out-hustled, outboxed Penn for 5 rounds. Incredible performance, heart, pace, strategy, all came together. Unanimous decision, one of the biggest shocks ever.
Showed that grit and game planning could overcome perceived talent gaps. Amazing.
Truly inspiring win for underdogs everywhere.
Let's go back to Fedor Emelianenko's early Pride days. Hard to believe now, but Heath Herring was favored against him initially.
Yeah, early on, Fedor was still building that mystique. Herring was a top established heavyweight. It wasn't seen as a mismatch then.
But Fedor just dismantled him. Stephen Quadros called him the most destructive fighter on the ground. Brutal ground and pound.
And then his fights against Big Nog, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, who was the submission guy.
Fedor just negated his jiu-jitsu, mauled him on the ground, won the title.
Those wins really announced his arrival as the best heavyweight on the planet. The Nogueira fights, especially the first and third, were defining.
Of course, the UFC wanted him badly after Pride folded. Dana White seemed willing to bend over backwards.
Yeah, even offered to let him compete in combat sambo. They really wanted that Lesnar fight.
But the co-promotion sticking point, M1 Global, it just never happened.
One of the biggest what-ifs in MMA history, that Fedor versus Lesnar fight would have been colossal.
Absolutely colossal. Okay, Rashad Evans, his path through TUS was interesting.
Yeah, won season 2 as a heavyweight, then dropped down.
Ended up fighting Michael Bisping because Tito Ortiz was doing Celebrity Apprentice.
Yes, that's right. Strange circumstances. And the media wasn't too high on Evans versus Bisping as a main event.
But the fans cared. Key UF winners had real drawing power back then. Evans won a close split decision,
which set him up against Chuck Liddell at UFC 88 in Atlanta.
Liddell was the huge favorite. The Southern crowd was definitely not rooting for Rashad.
Nope. And then, boom, that massive overhand right from Evans.
Knocked Liddell out cold. The arena went silent.
Eerie silence, apparently. Huge upset. Made Rashad a legit star overnight.
We have a quick intriguing mention of Hermes Franca here.
Okay.
Says he had a respectable career, lots of UFC fights, fought in K1, but will be best remembered for one of the sport's most embarrassing episodes.
Ooh, cliffhanger. Doesn't say what it was.
Nope. Leaves you wondering. Something for the listeners to maybe look up.
Intriguing.
Rich Franklin. After losing the middleweight belt to Anderson Silva, he moved up to light heavyweight.
Yeah, but the feeling was maybe he was a bit too small for 205.
They booked him in those catchweight fights at 195 pounds. Beat Wanderlei Silva, lost to Vitor Belfort.
Seemed like maybe wasted time not fully committing to bulking up for light heavyweight.
He did get that huge KO win over Chuck Liddell later, though. Dramatic finish.
He did, but the PQV numbers apparently weren't great, and at 35, the clock was ticking on him regaining top status.
Tough spot for a former champ.
Yeah, the sport moves fast.
Let's talk media for a second. Before the internet blew up, Full Contact Fighter magazine was the place for MMA news.
Oh yeah, FCF, essential reading back in the day. Had all the big early MMA writers.
But then came Sherdog, the underground. Free news, faster updates.
And FCF struggled to keep up. They didn't really pivot, you know? Still focused on just event results when the internet could do that instantly.
Needed more interviews, analysis, features.
Yeah.
But they didn't adapt. Sad to see print fade like that.
Sign of the times. Information moved online.
Daryl Goler, example of wrestling success, not guaranteeing MMA success.
Right. Pan-American silver medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling. Great credential.
But his MMA career was pretty average. Unexceptional, the source says.
Just shows it's a different sport. You need more than just wrestling, even elite wrestling, to make it big in MMA. Unlike guys like Couture or Randleman who transitioned successfully.
Mike Goldberg, The Voice.
Goldie, been there forever it feels like. Took over from Bruce Beck way back at Ultimate Japan in '97.
And he was a hockey announcer before that. Knew basically nothing about MMA.
Amazing, right? Jeff Blatnick, the late great Jeff Blatnick, really mentored him, taught him the positions, the terms.
Goldberg even got on the mats himself to learn. That's dedication.
Shows his commitment, and he stuck around long after Zuffa bought the company, became iconic.
Gary Goodrich, the ultimate gatekeeper.
Fought everybody. Seriously, look at his record. Heavyweight legends from different eras. Kickboxing legends.
Lost a lot in the first round, but always showed up, always took the tough fights.
Tons of heart and tough as nails. Gave guys their welcome to the big leagues moment.
Had some memorable moments too. Those crucifix elbows on Paul Herrera.
Yeah.
Head kick KOs of Fry and Evel.
Yeah, he wasn't just a punching bag. He could dish it out too. A true warrior of the sport.
Carlson Gracie. His legacy is huge.
Absolutely. Great fighter in the old Brazilian veiled Tudo days, fought Santana multiple times. Only one controversial loss.
But his biggest impact was as a coach, right? Developing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, splitting from Helio, opening his own school.
Huge influence, spread the art, innovated, trained generations of fighters. Pivotal figure.
And speaking of the Gracies, Helio's famous fights.
Legends. The fight against Masahiko Kimura, the judoka.
Kimura dominated, right. Through Helio, choked him out, broke his arm with that lock.
The Dudurami, yeah. Which then became known as the Kimura lock because of that fight.
And Helio refused to tap. Carlos had to throw in the towel. Incredible toughness or maybe stubbornness.
Bit of both, probably. Then years later, at age 42, he fights his former student, Waldemar Santana.
Because Santana went into pro wrestling, which Helio disapproved of.
Yeah, that was the issue. They had this private marathon fight. Supposedly went almost 4 hours.
4 hours. Unbelievable. And Helio lost by KO.
Yep. Ended his 23-year fighting career. What a story.
The Gracie family dynamics. Wow. Intense. Doesn't even cover it.
Robson Gracie apparently encouraged his sons to fight it out. Ralph Gracie shooting Renzo with a crossbow. Playfully, they say.
Playfully. Okay. And just constant fighting between the brothers and cousins.
Seems like it was just how they grew up. Constant competition, physical challenges, probably made them tougher fighters.
And Robson, justifying his son Ryan, attacking Walid Ismail, bringing up Walid, bragging, and making comments about, well, Walid's sexuality.
Yeah, that quote is pretty rough. Dismissing Royce as just a seller of T-shirts, too, shows some of the intense internal rivalries and, frankly, some pretty outdated and offensive views back then.
Definitely a different time. Wow. Okay, back to the UFC. The first one was a surprise hit.
Huge success right out of the gate, even with minimal traditional promotion. PPC buys just kept climbing for the early events.
But Rorion Gracie sold his share relatively early, didn't they?
Yeah, he felt he'd made his point. Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is supreme. And he apparently didn't like the rule changes that started coming in.
Wanted to keep it closer to that original vision. Interesting move.
Definitely shaped the future direction of the company.
Forrest Griffin. The ultimate underdog story arc.
Totally. Came off TUF 1, seen as this hardworking guy, maybe lacked elite talent, lost to Tito, lost to Jardine.
But fans loved him. His personality, his humor, how he handled losses.
Yeah, super relatable. But that loss to Keith Jardine seemed to change something.
He really leveled up his skills after that, didn't he? Got smarter.
Big time. Then he pulls off that huge upset win over Shogun Rua to earn a title shot.
Coaches TRFF against Rampage Jackson. Then beats Rampage in another upset to win the light heavyweight title.
Incredible journey. From TUF winner to People's Champion, fans went absolutely nuts.
Amazing transformation. Shows what dedication can do.
Truly.
Dennis Hallman, defined as a journeyman. Yet he beat Matt Hughes twice.
It's one of the weirdest stats in MMA Hallman. A solid but not elite fighter.
Submits Hughes, one of the most dominant champs ever, twice. In under 20 seconds both times.
Yeah.
In different promotions.
Makes no sense, right? Just shows the madness of MMA. Stylistic matchups, luck. Who knows? Bizarre.
Joachim Hansen, the guy who'd rather have bleeding hemorrhoids than fight for the UFC.
Huh. Memorable quote. Explains why many North American fans might not know him well, despite being a top lightweight for years.
Great grappler, dangerous striker, fought everyone in Japan. Just didn't want the UFC platform.
His choice. Built a great career over there. Shows there were other paths to success and respect outside the UFC.
Dan Henderson said he started MMA just for the money while still training for the Olympics. No sparring experience initially.
Pretty wild, right? Purely a financial move at first. But that Olympic wrestling base obviously served him pretty well.
Understatement. Turned out okay for him.
Just a bit.
Heath Herring. More than just the Texas crazy horse hair.
Definitely. Dangerous fighter. Sambo background, solid kickboxing. Was a top heavyweight for a long time before settling into more of a gatekeeper role.
Consistent presence. Tough out for anyone.
Yep. Durable, skilled. Fought all the big names.
Jeremy Horn. The sheer volume of fights.
Unbelievable. Fought Frank Shamrock early on, held his own. In 1999 alone, he fought 21 times.
21 fights in 1 year. That's insane.
Yeah.
Including 3 UFC wins, one over future champ Chuck Liddell.
Just constantly active. Fought over 100 times in his career against top guys. A true road warrior. Definition of a veteran.
Scott Howard at UFC 3. Won his first fight, set to face Royce Gracie.
The dream matchup back then.
But Royce was exhausted from his previous fight. Corner throws in the towel before it starts. Howard was so disappointed.
Yeah, he said, that was the only thing we wanted to do, face Gracie. Then he had to fight Steve Jenham instead of Ken Shamrock in the next round. Double disappointment.
Rough tournament for him.
Yeah.
Just shows the chaos of those early brackets.
It's totally unpredictable.
Matt Hughes dominated the welterweight division for years. Beat everyone.
Trigg, Sarah, Penn, GSP the first time, Royce. Incredible run.
He had that quote about Royce not evolving, Hughes being the better athlete. Pretty confident.
He backed it up for a long time. But eventually, even Hughes needed a break. Coach T-Youth against Sarah.
Led to that huge upset loss to Sarah. Then the grudge match, which Hughes won.
But in those later years, you could see he'd lost a step, right? Relying on strength and speed that wasn't quite there anymore.
Yeah, it seemed unlikely he'd reach that championship level again. Time catches up to everyone.
Even the greats.
Mark Hunt in Japan. What a wild ride.
K1 champ, massive power. Upsets Mirko Cro Cop in K1. Then beats him in MMA too. Looked like a title contender.
Then he fights Barnett, gets out-grappled, but somehow loses and still gets a fight against Fyodor Emelianenko.
Pride matchmaking could be. Interesting. Federer won, of course.
But then Hunt loses 3 straight fights to much smaller guys. Josh Barnett submitted him, but later losses to guys like Melvin Manhoef and Gegard Mousasi.
Yeah, went from unstoppable force to, as the source says, almost a laughingstock for a bit there after all the initial hype. Crazy swings.
The Ali versus Luki fight, just pure strangeness.
Supposed to be a fake exhibition, right. But Ali insisted on making it real.
That nobody knew what the rules should be. Boxing versus wrestling martial arts.
Yeah.
They kept changing them right up to the fight.
And the final rules were totally stacked against Inoki. Couldn't throw, couldn't grapple unless Ali was down. Basically, could only kick Ali's legs while on his back.
So Inoki spent 15 rounds scooting around on his back, kicking Ali's legs.
Pretty much. Bizarre spectacle, didn't live up to anyone's idea of a real fight.
Ensininu, the embodiment of Bushido, the warrior spirit.
Absolutely. Fearless. Always wanted to test himself against the best, toughest guys. Win or lose didn't matter as much as the challenge.
Fought killers like Igor Vovchanchin, Mark Kerr, took incredible punishment.
Just pure heart and courage. Did get a great win submitting Randy Couture with an armbar, though. Showed he had skills, too.
A true fighter's fighter. Respected by everyone.
Definitely.
Javier Mendez, coach at AKA. His philosophy.
Pretty straightforward. Find the opponent's weakness, make a game plan to exploit it. Don't worry about their name or reputation.
Smart. Focus on the matchup, not the hype. Sounds like why AKA produced so many champs.
Seems like a solid approach.
Quentin Rampage Jackson, after leaving the UFC the first time, had a great run in Pride.
Oh yeah, Rampage was huge in Pride, won 7 of 8 fights at one point, entered the 2003 Middleweight Grand Prix.
Beat Kevin Randleman, beat Igor Vovchanchin, had that controversial DQ loss for a groin strike.
Then the Grand Prix finals night. Beat Chuck Liddell by TKO. Stopped him with strikes after stuffing takedowns.
Huge win. Then lost to Wanderlei Silva by knees in the final that same night. Crazy tournament format.
But that win over Liddell really cemented the idea that Pride's light heavyweights were maybe better than the UFC's at that time.
Definitely fueled that debate for years. Pat Barry talking about his weight-cutting struggles.
Yeah, sounds like it really affected him, said it impacted his performance, disappointed his team, fans, the whole deal.
Tough part of the sport that fans don't always see. He was focused on getting it sorted for a title run, though.
Shows the dedication needed. It's not just training and fighting, it's managing your body constantly.
Brian Johnston looked the part, right? Young, built, patriotic, seemed perfect for Segi's early marketing.
Yeah, on paper, he looked like a star.
He just didn't have the skills. Lost to Fry, Coleman, Shamrock. The top guys handled him pretty easily.
Just goes to show, looks aren't everything in fighting. Gotta have the substance.
Judo's philosophy. More than just throws.
Right. Developed by Jigoro Kano over time. Core principles like Suryoku Zenyo, maximum efficiency, using your opponent's balance against them, Kazushi.
Here in G to Kyoe, mutual welfare and benefit, focusing on safe training.
Don Fry had that interesting comparison. Wrestling is like pushing, judo is like pulling, playing off that Kazushi idea.
Good way to think about it. Emphasizes technique over brute force.
Exactly. Foundational stuff.
Okay, this is amazing. Just bleed guy.
Oh, legendary.
Tom Lawler's crazy weigh-in at UFC 100 was apparently a tribute to the UFC 15 fight between Mark Kerr and Greg Ranger Stott.
And why is that fight a cult classic? Because of Stott's pre-fight interview.
Let me see if I can get this right. Stott basically said, my fighting style is R.I.P. Rest in peace. Doesn't matter if I get cut. Doesn't matter if I get beat. I'm just going to keep coming forward. You're going to have to kill me to stop me.
Yes. Just pure, unadulterated, slightly unhinged confidence. He got destroyed by Kerr, obviously, but that interview lives forever.
Incredible. Only in MMA.
Truly.
Karate in MMA.
Oh.
It had a rough start, didn't it?
Yeah. Early UFC karate guys often got taken down and submitted by wrestlers or BJJ practitioners. Looked ineffective.
But then you had guys with karate backgrounds like Bas Rutten, GSP, Andy Hug. But they all had to add other styles, right? Cross-train heavily.
Exactly. They showed karate could be a base, but you needed wrestling, grappling, Muay Thai.
Lyoto Machida winning the UFC light heavyweight title was the real turning point, maybe, making people see karate itself as legit again.
I think so. Machida's style was so unique, so karate-based, even though he also trained BJJ and wrestling. His movement, his timing, It baffled people.
Showed that a traditional art, adapted correctly, could still dominate at the highest level.
Yeah, evolution of the sport.
Tim Kennedy. What a path. Promising MMA fighter.
Wins over guys like Cruz Chacon, Jason Miller. Looked like he had a bright future.
Then 9/11 happens. And he joins the Army.
Goes to Iraq, Ranger School, Special Forces.
Yeah.
Becomes a decorated Green Beret. A literal war hero.
Instead of maybe becoming a UFC champion.
Yeah.
Incredible sacrifice and choice.
Truly inspiring. And he came back to MMA successfully after his service, too. Just an amazing life story.
Frank Trigg talking about a submission win. And promoters seeming happier with that than a ground-and-pound finish.
Interesting little insight. Suggests maybe the promotion preferred the optics of a clean submission over a potentially bloody TKO back then.
I could. Hints at how promoters might subtly shape perceptions or encourage certain fight types.
Maybe. Little behind-the-curtain glimpse.
The names of holds. Americana and Kimura.
Right. Americana armbar apparently came from an American wrestler showing the move in Brazil.
And the Kimura we mentioned earlier, named after Masahiko Kimura, using it to break Helio Gracie's arm.
Yep. And the Kimura is generally seen as more versatile than the Americana, right? You can hit it from more positions, use it for sweeps.
Karo Parisian and Sakuraba even used standing Kimuras, Sakuraba famously against Renzo Gracie.
Shows its utility. And again, connects back to Helio Gracie falling to that hold, refusing to tap. The history is all intertwined.
Tsuyoshi Kosaka, or TK, known for that early, maybe lucky, punch KO of Fedor.
Yeah, that's always going to be part of his story. An asterisk on Fedor's record for years.
But TK was more than that, right? Our source calls him a cult classic for hardcore fans because of his heart and determination.
Exactly. Showed incredible toughness in the rematch with Fedor and throughout his career. Former judo black belt, transitioned to rings shoot-style fighting after an injury. Respected veteran.
Robbie Lawler. Released from the UFC early on.
Yeah.
They liked his attitude, but wanted him to round out his game.
Yeah, he was always that explosive striker, ruthless, but vulnerable to grapplers.
And did he change after leaving the UFC?
Not really. Went to other promotions, won titles, but still fought pretty much the same way. All action, heavy hands, sprawl and brawl, but still got submitted by good grapplers sometimes.
Stick to what you know, I guess. Worked out pretty well for him in the long run eventually.
It certainly did.
Rochelle Leah, former UFC Octagon girl, hosting UFC All Access. Her most memorable moment.
Anderson Silva. Apparently he was surprisingly funny and engaging.
Did an impromptu Michael Jackson singing and dancing bit. Yeah. And got her to join in on camera.
Sounds like it. Shows a different side to the often stoic Anderson Silva. Fun behind-the-scenes story.
Chris Lieben, after TO1, became a fixture on those Spike TV Ultimate Fight Night cards.
The Crippler. Always came to fight. Exciting style.
Beat mid-level guys. Often lost when he stepped up against top competition.
Yeah.
But fans loved him anyway.
Totally. He was guaranteed action, win or lose. That kept him employed and popular for a long time.
Kun Lei. Great showman and a great fighter. That's rare.
Yeah. Usually you get one or the other in martial arts, right? Pure flashy stuff or pure gritty practicality. Lei had both. Amazing Sanshou background, incredible kicks, and charisma.
Unique talent. Very exciting to watch.
Definitely.
Brock Lesnar coming over from WWE already had that aura of toughness.
Massive athlete, legit wrestling background, huge crossover star potential.
Loses his UFC debut to Frank Mir, gets caught in the leg lock, maybe got a bit too eager.
Yeah, looked like his enthusiasm got the better of him. Rushed in, made a mistake against a submission expert.
But even in losing, you could see the star power, right? The crowd reaction was huge.
Oh, yeah. The UFC knew they had something, so for his next fight, they needed to protect him a bit.
Matched him against Heath Herring. A tough veteran, but maybe stylistically favorable for Lesnar. Less of a submission threat than Mir.
Exactly. Played to Lesnar's strengths, wrestling power, and Lesnar dominated him. Smart matchmaking to build their new star.
Definitely worked. Propelled him towards the title fast.
Very fast.
John Lewis. Sounds like he was connected to everyone in early MMA.
The Kevin Bacon of MMA, apparently. Fighter, trainer, promoter, agent. Involved in so many things.
Trained with John Peretti, introduced Dana White to Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, involved with Extreme Fighting, World Fighting Alliance.
Just seemed to be everywhere, connecting people, making things happen behind the scenes. Huge influence.
Chuck Liddell fighting in the Pride 2003 Grand Prix, representing the UFC.
Yeah, that was a big deal. UFC letting their star go fight in Pride.
He fought Alistair Overeem in the quarterfinals. Used Pride's rules, like knees to a downed opponent.
Overeem actually rallied back a bit, but Chuck caught him with that signature overhand right Knockout.
Moved on to the Final Four, but then ran into Quentin Jackson.
And Rampage kind of dominated him, didn't he? Outstruck him, out-wrestled him, corner threw in the towel.
Big loss for Liddell. After being so dominant, suddenly he's the one getting finished. Must have been an eye-opener.
Definitely a learning experience. Showed the depth of talent in Pride's 205 division.
Lyoto Machida again, silencing critics who called him boring.
Yeah, he went through a phase where he won a lot of decisions. Very methodical, elusive, effective, but maybe not thrilling for everyone.
Then he starts knocking guys out.
Yeah.
KO'd Thiago Silva at UFC 94, his first stoppage by strikes in ages.
Showed a new dimension to his game. Then the title fight against Rashad Evans.
Just destroyed him. Dramatic knockout to win the belt. Suddenly everyone's asking, how do you beat this guy?
Completely changed the narrative around him. From elusive point fighter to untouchable karate master.
The roots of MMA. Going back to Mitsuyo Maeda teaching judo to Carlos Gracie in 1917.
Amazing lineage. Carlos teaches his brothers, Helio refines it, grandson Rorian starts the UFC, all stemming from that judo connection.
Maeda himself is a bit mysterious, right? Pro wrestling background clouds his record, but supposedly won hundreds of challenge matches.
Yeah, separating the real fights from the works is tough, but clearly he was highly skilled and knew what techniques were effective in real combat. Crucial figure.
Mario Masagatti, the referee, seems like he got a lot of flack.
Understatement. Dana White publicly ripped him apart multiple times, called him the worst ever.
Yikes. Refereeing's a tough job, but sounds like Masagatti made some high-profile errors.
Yeah, caught a lot of criticism from fighters, fans, and the promotion.
Pancrase gets mentioned again. That shoot-style influence was important in Japan.
Very influential. Blurred the lines between pro wrestling and real fighting, produced a lot of early MMA talent.
Passing the guard. Fundamental concept in grappling.
Huge. Positional hierarchy. Getting past the legs to side control or mount gives you control, striking angles, submission threats.
The source mentions the Philly crowd reacting loudly when BJ Penn was trying to pass Kenny Florian's half guard. Shows the fans were becoming knowledgeable.
Definitely. Fans understanding the nuances of the ground game, the importance of advancing position. Bottom fighter's goal is always sweep or regain guard.
Mark Randleman's suplex on Fedor.
Kevin Randleman, yeah, the monster. That suplex.
Yeah.
Maybe the most replayed highlight in Pride history.
Just launched Fedor through the air, landed him right on his head. Looked devastating.
And Fedor just popped back up and submitted him moments later.
Incredible. But the throw itself became legendary. Symbolized Randleman's explosive potential, even if he wasn't always consistent.
Perfect encapsulation. Pure athletic brilliance in one moment.
Mark Ratner, head of the Nevada Commission, initially a huge opponent of MMA.
Oh, yeah. Testified before Congress. Against it, went on Larry King Live, bashing it. Saw it as brutal and dangerous.
But he eventually came around, right? Became involved with the UFC later on.
He did. Shows how perceptions of the sport changed dramatically once regulations and safety measures improved. Significant shift.
Rico Rodriguez won the UFC heavyweight title. Then it all fell apart.
Sad story. Got the title, the fame, the money, and apparently couldn't handle it. Lifestyle issues, partying, training became second
But
bed.
lost the belt in his very next fight, got released from the UFC.
And apparently never beat another world-class opponent after that. Gained a lot of weight, became kind of a cautionary tale.
Shows the pitfalls of sudden success if you're not grounded.
Definitely. Discipline is key, in and out of the cage.
Mauricio Shogun Rua in Pride. Just a wrecking machine.
Devastating Muay Thai, capoeira kicks. So aggressive, only lost once early on, Babalu Sobral.
Dominated Pride's middleweight 205-pound division. Quick finishes, beat top guys like Rampage, Arona, Overeem.
And showed grappling, too. Leg locks, omoplatas. Became a BJJ black belt super fast. Just an absolute force during that Pride run.
Marco Ruiz, another pioneer. Cross-trained early.
Yeah, king of the streets. More than just a striker. Good kickboxing. Understood the ground game, even though he had a rivalry with the Gracies.
UFC 7 was his peak. Won the tournament. But had some dull fights, too, like against Toktarov.
Later career in Pride was tough. Injuries mounted, and losing to that pro wrestler was kind of the end for him competitively.
Shame. Was ahead of his time in some ways.
Definitely. Early adopter of mixing styles.
Rumble on the Rock in Hawaii had a final show co-promoted with Elite XC right before Elite XC collapsed.
Yeah, it kind of marked the end for both promotions in a way. Showed the volatility of the MMA landscape back then.
Suzushi Sakuraba, the Gracie Hunter.
Legend. Became a megastar in Japan specifically by beating members of the Gracie family.
Beat Royler by Kimura. Referee controversially stopped it. Then the big one against Royce in the Pride 2000 Grand Prix.
Under special rules, no time limits, no referee stoppages, fight until someone quits or can't continue.
And it went 90 minutes. Royce's corner eventually threw in the towel, made Sakuraba a national hero.
He even got a controversial decision win over Guy Mesger earlier in that tournament just to get to the Royce fight, which everyone wanted to see. Epic saga.
Hayato Mach Sakurai, Shudo champ, moved to Pride Bushido.
Great lightweight. Beat guys like Kao Uno, Luis Azeredo, then starred in that 160-pound Pride tournament built around Takanori Gomi.
Had impressive wins in that tournament. KO Jens Pulver, beat Joachim Hansen.
Made it to the final against Gomi, lost after trying a hip throw that backfired. Great fight, though.
Stayed relevant for years, even in his 30s. Could still pull off upsets against top guys like Aoki. Tough veteran.
Very skilled, always dangerous.
Ivan Salivary. Liked by people in the industry, had exciting submission wins.
Yeah, his fight against Nate Marquardt was supposed to be a showcase. Both exciting guys.
But the fight was terrible. One of the worst fights of all time. According to the source, just nothing happened. Stare down.
And Salivary got released because of it, despite being popular. Ouch.
Shows how much pressure there is to entertain, especially back then. One bad, boring fight could cost you your job. Sambo, the Russian martial art.
Means self-defense without weapons. Developed for Soviet special forces, Spetsnaz.
Spread as a sport, similar rules to judo, but some key differences. The uniform, jacket, shorts, wrestling shoes, leg locks allowed, no chokes in sports sambo.
Right. Scoring throws is different too, emphasizes the attacker staying on their feet. Less restrictive grip rules lead to more throws. Lots of crossover with judo techniques, though. Fitter's base, obviously.
Christiane Cyborg Santos, huge figure in early women's MMA.
Elite XC and Strikeforce saw her potential, especially as a rival for Gina Carano.
Total contrast in personas, right? Carano, the media darling, Cyborg, the intimidating powerhouse.
Perfect foils.
Yeah.
And their fight in 2009 headlining Strikeforce.
Yeah.
It was massive. Huge crowd, huge attention for women's MMA. Historic moment.
Bob Sapp, what a strange brief peak.
His first year was basically his entire prime. That 8-month run in 2002 was insane.
Almost beat Big Nog, powerbombed him like a pro wrestler, lost by armbar, eventually due to exhaustion.
Then beat kickboxing legend Ernesto Hughes twice in K1. Just unbelievable.
His sheer size made him seem unstoppable for a minute. But fighting constantly, doing movies, commercials, it caught up to him fast.
Yeah, burned bright and faded quickly, but man, what an impact he made in that short time.
Rumina Sato, Shudo submission wizard.
Could have been a huge star if lighter weights were bigger back then. A cult hero for the hardcore Shudo fans.
Incredible submission skills, right? Calf slicers, flying reverse triangles, stuff you rarely see. On top of the basics, dominated early in Shudo.
Just ridiculously talented on the ground, ahead of his time in many ways.
Dan Severn showing up at UFC 4. The Beast.
Looked like something out of the 19th century. Mustache, wrestling singlet, but legit credentials, Olympic qualifier.
But to Race Gracie, he was just prey.
Yeah, showed the mindset back then. Didn't matter how credentialed a wrestler you were, if you didn't know submissions, the Gracies felt they had your number.
Frank Shamrock's evolution after leaving his brother Ken's Lion's Den.
Big split there. Frank formed the alliance with Maurice Smith, Tsuyoshi Kosaka, focused on open exchange of techniques.
And his stand-up got way better. Knocked out Enson Inouye.
Won the first UFC middleweight, later light heavyweight title, with quick finishes, became a big star in his own right.
And that win over Tito Ortiz. Huge fight, fueled by that storyline of Frank getting revenge for his former Lion's Den teammates Tito had beaten.
Even though they were apparently friendly backstage. Gotta love the promotional angles.
TF3 has some coaching drama. Fighters and trainers not getting along.
Yeah, source mentions that when the team chemistry isn't right on the show, it creates problems, trickles down, makes sense, stressful environment.
ShoeDog.com and the UFC. Contentious relationship.
Randy Couture used to write for them, but then Josh Gross wrote some critical stuff. Dana White got mad.
And it went downhill. Loretta Hunt reported on managers losing backstage passes. White went on that infamous rant.
Yeah, homophobic and misogynistic comments. Huge controversy. Sherdog got banned from UFC events for a while.
Came back briefly after the national attention, but then got banned again. Always seemed like they were on the outs, but still covering everything.
Tough relationship. Power dynamics between independent media and a dominant promotion.
Sean Shirk. Incredible wrestler.
The muscle shark.
Ah.
Wrestling often carried him. Had a long unbeaten streak as a welterweight before facing Hughes. Even won rounds against Hughes, which almost nobody did.
But the steroid suspension, that was the big hit to his career.
Yeah, major setback. Tainted his legacy for some.
Anderson Silva before the UFC. Had titles in Shudo, Cage Rage,
Yeah.
but wasn't always consistent.
Right. Had some surprising losses. Submitted by Deju Takase via triangle, lost by a flying heel hook to Ryo Chonin.
Chris Lieben actually called it before their fight, said Silva had wins, but also losses to guys Lieben hadn't even heard of. Accurate.
And Lieben confidently predicted he'd knock Silva out.
Then Silva comes in and just destroys him in seconds. Unbelievable debut performance.
Yeah.
Silence any doubts immediately.
And kick off one of the most dominant runs ever.
Wanderlei Silva in pride. Just list of victims.
Rampage, Sakuraba, Mesger, Kondo, Kanehara just ran through the division. The Axe Murderer, terrifying.
Kimbo Slice. From YouTube street fights to MMA stardom.
Incredible story. Hurricane Andrew changed his life path. Ended up in these backyard brawls that went viral.
Decided fighting was better than crime after winning some money in those raw, untrained street fights.
Yeah.
Became a household name.
Huge crossover appeal. Brought a whole new audience to MMA, for better or worse.
Mario Sperry. BJJ, an ADCC legend, co-founded Brazilian top team.
Huge influence as a grappler and coach. Had a solid, if not spectacular, MMA career himself. Beat Igor Vovchanchin, known for aggressive ground game.
Got in BJJ after a 2-week camp with Carlson Gracie that changed his life. Another Carlson protege making waves.
Absolutely. BTT was a powerhouse team for years.
Sprawl and brawl, the strategy.
Rely on takedown defense, the sprawl, and knockout power, the brawl. Chuck Liddell perfected it. Jens Pulver used it effectively at lightweight.
But you need both parts, right? Good wrestling and KO power. If you're a wrestler without power trying it.
You often just end up in kickboxing matches you might not be equipped for. High risk, high reward style.
Joe Stevenson. 1 TF2.
Was the favorite going in. Came from King of the Cage. Solid grappler. Won the show. Got the contract.
Dropped to lightweight. Went on a win streak. Earned a title shot against BJ Penn at UFC 80.
And Penn just mauled him.
Yeah.
Bloody fight. Stevenson was clearly outmatched.
Showed the gap between winning TUF and beating the elite champion. Penn was super motivated to finally win that UFC lightweight belt too.
Yeah, Penn looked incredible that night.
Georges St. Pierre's UFC debut against Carol Parisian.
Great fight. Showcased two future stars of the division. GSP won by decision.
And on that same card, Penn beat Hughes for the welterweight title. But then Penn left and got stripped.
Which left the title vacant. And somehow GSP, with only 2 UFC fights, gets the call to fight Hughes for the belt.
Crazy quick rise. Shows how much potential they saw in him right away.
And the rest is history.
Genki Sudo, the ultimate showman.
Entrances were performance art, robots, dancers, elaborate costumes, as memorable as the fights.
And he was a good fighter, too. Tricky submissions, unorthodox movement. Plus those post-fight "we are all one" messages. Unique character.
Totally unique. Added so much color to Japanese MMA.
Tim Sylvia again. Gets released by UFC, known for dull fights, backstage issues.
But his manager, Monty Cox, gets him a shot at Fedor for the new WAMA heavyweight title. How? Cox was well-connected, pulled some strings, big opportunity for Sylvia on Affliction's first card, in front of a big American audience.
And Fedor just runs through him, knocks him down, submits him in like 36 seconds.
Total demolition. Made a huge statement for Fedor to the U.S. audience, not the return Sylvia wanted Eugenio to do, legend in old-school Vale Tudo in Brazil, fought Renzo Gracie in that infamous Pentagon combat show. The lights went out, crowd rioted, declared a no contest just as to do might have been winning.
Insane story. He eventually debuted in the UFC years later, had a memorable war with Mikey Burnett, a true old-school warrior.
Yeah, part of that almost mythical pre-UFC Brazilian scene.
The UWFI trying to lure Rickson Gracie.
Japanese shoot-style wrestling promotion, worried about losing legitimacy to real MMA like Pride.
Offered Rickson huge money to fight their star Takada. Rickson said no.
So UWFI sent Yoji Onjo to Rickson's dojo in LA to basically challenge him, try to embarrass him.
And Rickson beat him up badly behind closed doors.
Yeah.
The story got out, made UWFI look bad, hurt Shoot Style's reputation. Don't mess with Rickson.
Big mistake by UWFI. Contributed to the decline of that style as MMA rose.
Nobuhiko Takada himself didn't have much success in real MMA.
There were even rumors Pride paid Mark Coleman to take a dive against Takada, just to give him a win after the Gracie losses.
Wow, even that didn't really restore his image. But props to him for fighting top guys despite being outmatched.
Yeah, it took guts to step in there against killers like Igor Vovchanchin and Mirko Cro Cop.
Deju Takase beat Anderson Silva. How?
It's still unbelievable. Takase had that weird win over the massive Emmanuel Yarborough before that, looked totally outmatched.
Then he fights Anderson Silva.
Yeah.
and dominates him on the ground, submits him with a triangle.
Yeah. Silva looked completely lost on the mat in that fight. Takase just kept attacking, threatening submissions. One of the biggest upsets ever, and one of only 2 submission losses for Silva early on. Crazy.
Yeah, Yoshihiro Takayama. Awful but awesome.
Came from UWFI shoot style with guys like Sakuraba. Learned the hard way it wasn't real, fighting through tough losses and pride.
Not much skill, but
Yeah.
incredible toughness. Took insane punishment.
Exactly. And that led to the legendary brawl with Don Fry in Pride. Just stood in the pocket, grabbing each other's heads, throwing bombs. Maybe the fiercest exchange ever.
Unbelievable fight. Made him a legend despite his record.
Pure heart and chin.
Oleg Toktarov.
Yeah.
Early UFC tournament winner. The Russian Bear.
Had that dull fight with Shamrock, lost the ultimate final to Severn. His rolling leg lock didn't work on Sever.
Got knocked out a few times later.
Yeah.
Then transitioned to acting.
Yeah. Became a successful actor, often playing Russian bad guys in Hollywood movies like 15 Minutes, National Treasure, TV shows. Found a great second career.
Evan Tanner.
Yeah.
A self-taught champion.
Philosopher fighter. Didn't even see himself as a fighter initially. Just another life experience. An adventurous guy.
Taught himself BJJ from watching tapes. Incredible. Had early success. Got to the UFC. Challenged for titles at both 205 and 185.
Eventually won the vacant middleweight title. Amazing story of self-belief and just figuring things out on his own. Truly inspiring.
The ultimate fighter. Can't overstate his impact.
Game changer. Brilliant concept. Perfect execution for its time. Saved the UFC, basically. Boosted PPV buys massively.
Created new stars overnight. Forrest Griffin, Rashad Evans, Matt Serra.
Yeah.
Winners became champs. Others became headliners.
Even when it seemed to lose momentum later, bringing in Kimbo Slice for season 10 gave it record ratings, a huge second wind. Just massive for the sport's growth.
James Thompson. Big, muscular guy.
Yeah.
Maybe relied on size a bit much.
But what people remember most, his ear exploding.
Right. Got hit with an elbow, his ear just detonated. Gruesome cauliflower ear injury.
Awful, the source says, but by far the most interesting moment of his career. Kind of overshadowed his actual fights. Crazy what people remember.
Fan Patry and TKO in Montreal.
Yeah, built Montreal into a huge MMA market. TKO Major League MMA was packing the Bell Center.
Apparently Dana White was surprised by how strong the fan base was there. Patry played a key role, despite maybe having some controversies later as a manager.
His impact on Canadian MMA, especially in Quebec, is undeniable. Laid the groundwork.
Miguel Torres. Great fighter who finally got his due when Zuffa bought the WEC.
Exactly. Amazing record before WEC. Carlson Gracie thought highly of him, but fighting on smaller shows, nobody really knew him.
WEC gave him that bigger platform, showcased those lighter weight classes. He deserved the spotlight.
Definitely. Great example of talent getting recognized through acquisition.
Frank Trigg's second UFC run.
Got cut after losing to GSP, went to Japan, Hawaii, did commentary for Pride, then came back.
Signed a 4-fight deal, showed he still wanted to compete at the highest level, couldn't stay away.
Fighter's mentality, always want one more shot.
The UFC's market dominance now surpassed boxing, pro wrestling, and US PPV. Global ambitions, network TV.
Incredible growth from near bankruptcy in the early 2000s to a global sports powerhouse. Unprecedented, really.
Ultimate 95. The first all-star tournament.
Yeah, but Gracie was out due to contract issues. Ken Shamrock was injured from their super fight.
So Dan Severn won it. Helped by the introduction of judges' decisions for the first time, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't just end in a draw anymore.
Exactly. Another step in the evolution of the rules and format. Severn ground his way to victory.
Don Fry's last UFC fight. Ultimate 96 final against Tank Abbott.
Fry was apparently sick, throwing up backstage before the fight.
And Tank came out fast, dominating early. Looked like Fry was done.
But Fry rallied back. Started stomping Tank's feet. Weird tactic. Then locked in a rear naked choke.
Incredible comeback win. What a way to go out. That was his last UFC fight before leaving for pro wrestling in Japan.
True warrior performance. Gutsy win.
The evolution of UFC rules. So important.
Went from no rules, which wasn't totally true, no biting or eye gouging, with maybe a small fine,
Campbell McLaren seeing it as just brutal spectacle.
to facing huge political pressure, Senator John McCain calling it human cockfighting, needing rules for survival and safety.
Jeff Blatnick was key, right? Forming the Mixed Martial Arts Council. Developing the unified rules.
Absolutely. Introducing time limits, judges, weight classes, mandatory gloves, transformed it from spectacle to sport over several years. Crucial evolution.
Veio Tudo history in Brazil. Predates USC.
Started as those Gracie challenge matches. later televised as Heroi du Ring, Heroes of the Ring, often showcasing jiu-jitsu's dominance.
But the Gracies controlled the matchmaking. And then a brutal arm break incident got the show canceled.
Yeah, João Alberto Barreto broke an opponent's arm, public outcry, show replaced by pro wrestling, shows the early struggles with brutality and public perception even in Brazil.
Brandon Vera came in with huge hype, talked about holding 2 belts at once, heavyweight and light heavyweight.
Looked amazing early on, beat Frank Mir. The potential seemed limitless.
But then that long contract dispute kept him out for nearly a year.
And when he came back, the results were mixed. Never quite regained that initial unstoppable momentum. Shows how contract issues and layoffs can derail a career.
UFC buying Pride and unexpectedly getting the WEC in the deal.
Wild turn of events. Zuffa suddenly owned 2 promotions. WEC initially didn't want to be UFC light.
But eventually carved out its niche, focusing on the lighter weight classes, 155, 145, 135, became the premier place for smaller fighters. Like an American Shudo.
Huge development. Gave guys like Urijah Faber, Miguel Torres, Jose Aldo, Dominic Cruz a major platform. Changed the game for lighter weights.
World Victory Road, Sengoku. Tried to compete in Japan after Pride died.
Yeah, Dream scooped up a lot of the Pride fighters, but Sengoku managed to sign some big Japanese stars like Misaki, Gomi, Hidehiko Yoshida.
Had a good roster, but lacked major TV exposure in Japan. Made them seem smaller than they were.
Exactly. Showed the challenge of competing without that big TV deal, even with name fighters. Tough market.
Gilbert Yvel complaining about Pride fighters just wanted to grapple.
Frustrated striker's lament. He wanted to stand and bang.
He controversially jumped from rings to Pride for a bigger paycheck, right? Angered the rings boss.
Yeah, Akira Maeda was furious. But in Pride, Yvel's lack of ground game got exposed more without the rope escapes they had in rings.
Turned him from a killer striker into more of an ordinary fighter, against guys who could take him down. Still had memorable KOs, though, like against Goodridge.
Shows how rules and matchmaking impact careers. Yvel remained a dangerous fringe contender for years.
And finally, some stats on UFC career lengths.
Always interesting. Guys with 12 UFC fights, their records. Gives context.
And the longest time between UFC fights. Royce Gracie at the top with 4,068 days. Over 11 years between UFC 5 and his fight with Hughes at UFC 60.
Incredible gap. Shows the long, strange arcs some careers take in this sport.
So, wow, that was quite the deep dive into the unexpected side of MMA history.
Yeah, it definitely went beyond the usual narratives. You see how images were built, sometimes falsely.
How money drove decisions in ways you wouldn't think, like Akebono leaving sumo.
The crazy paths to success, like Edgar's upset or failure, like Affliction's collapse or Rico Rodriguez's fall.
And just all the weird behind-the-scenes stuff, the rule changes, the personalities.
It really shows that MMA history is way more complex and, frankly, more interesting and unpredictable than just watching the fights might suggest.
Totally. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, what stories are we maybe missing now? What seems straightforward today but has hidden depths.
That's a great question. Maybe a final thought for everyone listening. How do these stories from the past change how you look at modern MMA? Do you see echoes of these illusions, these unexpected turns still playing out today?
Definitely something to think about. And hey, if you listeners have your own favorite surprising MMA stories or questions, let us know. Maybe we need a part 2 of this deep dive someday.
Could definitely keep going. Thanks for joining us on this exploration.